In this video, we're going to go ahead and continue locking down our application. Now that we are storing some authentication related information in the Redux store, we can use that information to determine whether or not a user should be able to navigate to a specific page when the app is already up and running. Over inside of source app.js, the only time we really run this check is when the page first loads or when the auth status changes. That's great, but what if I do try to navigate while already using the application? We want to make sure to take care of that too. So let's go ahead and close down all of the files, and we're going to switch over to the dev server, yarn run dev server. And once I am on the dev server, all we're going to do is go over to localhost 8080 and check things out as they currently stand. So as they currently stand, we do have a few issues. We are able to navigate to those private pages even if we are logged out. So by default, I get to the correct location. I'm not logged in. I'm on the login page. But if I click create expense, it brings me over to this page even though it shouldn't. What we're going to focus on doing is taking care of that by making some changes to our app router. Inside of here, what we're going to do is modify how we set up the routes. We're going to add a couple new components that make sure to actually run that check for authentication before rendering the specific thing, whether it's the dashboard page, the add expense page, or the edit expense page, all of which are private. With this little project, I find it easier to view the end solution in this file first, then we'll create the other file. So in the end of the day, what we're going to do is we're going to import something. It's going to be a component like private route, and private route is going to come from a file in the same directory, in the routers directory // and we'll call this one private route.js. We'll create that file in just a moment. The goal is to be able to use private route in place of route for those pages. So right here, private route, and I would do the exact same thing for the three guys, dashboard, create, and edit. Now, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, how is this ever going to work? We do still need to set up the route, right? And yes, we are going to set up the route. That's just going to be handled by private route. Then when we actually render the route, we can determine what to do. We can look at the auth status and we can figure out if the user should see what they're trying to see or if they should be redirected somewhere else. So this is the actual code that we're going to leave in app router. We don't have to change anything else over here. What we do have to do though is actually create private route and fill that one out. So over in the routers directory, I'm going to create it. That would be private route.js. And inside of here, we're going to start off by importing a few things that we're going to need. First up, React. Importing React from React. I'm also going to need connect, importing the named export connect from React Redux, since we are going to go ahead and actually use the Redux store to determine whether or not the user is authenticated. And we're going to be grabbing some stuff from React Router DOM as well. So I'm going to import the things we're going to need. We are going to need route, so I'll grab that. And we're going to grab that from right here, React-router-DOM. Excellent. Now that we have the private route imports in place, we're going to focus on the actual component. We're going to create the stateless functional component. Then we're going to export the connected version for consumption by app router. I'm going to kick things off with a named export for the const private route. This will be the unconnected component. It's going to be a stateless functional component, and we'll talk about the props in just a little bit. Then we will set up the arrow and we will implicitly return some JSX. Nothing crazy there. Down below, before we add any JSX in, we can go ahead and connect things. I'm going to create a const for map state to props. We don't need to actually dispatch anything, but we do need to grab some values. We need to figure out if the user is authenticated or not. Right here, we can define that function. This one is going to get the state, and we can just implicitly return an object. On that object, there's just one thing we need, something along the lines of is authenticated, though you can call that whatever you like. This is going to be a Boolean. It's true if we are authenticated, false otherwise. Now, we already have that information in state.auth.uid. If this exists, then we know we are authenticated. If it doesn't, we are unauthenticated. Now, currently, we're going to get undefined if we're unauthenticated, or the user ID, the string value, if we are authenticated. I'm going to flip those to their actual Boolean values using 2 exclamation marks, as we've done earlier in the course. Now we'll have the Boolean true if we are authenticated and the Boolean false otherwise. Next up, we want to export by default the connected version of the component. So I'm going to use connect. I'm going to provide map state to props. No need for the second argument since we're not providing map dispatch to props. And over here, I'm going to provide the component we're trying to connect, private route. Now let's go ahead and avoid actually doing anything conditionally and just look at the very basics. So the big picture goal from here is to create an instance of route. So we do still want to use route, even if we're not directly using it in app router. We're going to use it inside of here. So we're going to create an instance of route. And for the moment, all we're going to do is take all of the props. So I'll define props right here, and we're going to pass them down into route by spreading them out. So I'll use ... props. Now this is going to work, but maybe not as expected. So let's go ahead and kick things off by saving both files, and we're going to see exactly what we get currently, and then we'll figure out how we can change it to do something a little more meaningful. So over here, what do we have? We have nothing really, right? We just have what we had before. And if I click create expense, I can still see this page. So this is actually a good thing. The fact that I'm seeing this at least tells us that the route is correctly getting set up. Private route is at least working in its current state. And now all we really need to do is add the conditional logic side in. So we have to determine whether or not the person is logged in, and we already have that via the prop. Then we have to do the appropriate thing, and that's where things are going to get a little bit trickier. Let's kick things off by adding a little bit of destructuring into the props argument. So I'm going to destructure a few things. I'm going to start off by destructuring is authenticated. I'm going to grab that. That's part of the conditional logic. I'm also going to destructure component, which was passed in over here. We pass in component for all three instances of private route, which means that over here we can destructure that. That is lowercase c component. We're eventually going to be rendering it, and we know we need an uppercase name for that. So I'm going to rename it to uppercase c component. And this is a pretty common pattern. Now this line is getting pretty long, so let's go ahead and break it up. I'm going to add a couple of line breaks, putting each destructured thing on their own line. And there's just one more thing we're going to destructure right here. What we want to do is not grab is authenticated or component. We just want to grab the rest of the props to make sure they correctly get down to route. So for example, we have all sorts of props we might use. We have exact, path, and others. We need to make sure all of these make their way from the props here to the props of route. To do that, we're going to be using the rest operator. So when we're creating objects, we can spread out an object to spread out all of its properties. When we're destructuring objects, we can use the rest operator ... rest to get a variable called rest with all of the stuff that we did not destructure. So this will contain everything but is authenticated and component, and rest is just the variable name. I could have ... props or ... anything else. So this is going to give us access to all of the other stuff, and that is what we're going to pass down to route. So right here, I will spread out rest. So currently, route is not getting is authenticated passed to it, which is great. It doesn't support that, but it's also not getting component passed to it. We're going to fix that by defining component on our own. This is where we're going to add the conditional logic. So we're going to define component. I'm going to set up an arrow function. That arrow function will implicitly return some JSX. And inside of here, we're going to get the meaningful work done. First up, let's go ahead and get all of the props that were passed to route. We do want to pass those through to the individual component. And now we're going to add the conditional logic. So we're going to check if the user is authenticated. If they are authenticated, great. We're going to do one thing. We can use the ternary operator to set that up. If they're not authenticated, that's fine too. We're just going to do something else. So if they are authenticated, what do we want to do? We want to get some JSX rendered to the screen. And for now, we can just create an instance of component, and we can make sure it gets all of the correct props, the one that it's currently getting when we're using route, but that it's no longer getting if we were to define it like this. So things like history, which we already explored. Right here, all I'm going to do is spread out ... props. Excellent. Now, what do we want to do if the user is not authenticated? We're going to redirect them. And React Router DOM actually gives us a way to do that via a component called redirect. Redirect is super easy to use. When redirect gets rendered, it redirects you. So right here, we can use redirect. We can redirect to, and then we just provide the path as the toProp /. So this is going to render the component if we are authenticated. It is going to redirect us away from that page and to the login page otherwise. Let's go ahead and save both of our files. The application is going to refresh in the background and we can see exactly what we get. Now, things always worked in the beginning. We always got to the right place. Here we are not logged in, so we're at the login page. But the real question is what happens when I click Create Expense? I click Create Expense and you can see that we are still sitting on the login page. So no longer are we able to dive into those internal pages and actually mess things up. Now, since we do have this fixed, we can always go ahead and render the header just on those private routes. So over here, I could take the header out of app router. I can delete the import and I can delete the usage, and we can go ahead and add that into private route if we wanted to. So right here, I could import header from the header component file, /components/header. Then I can just use it down below. I'm going to put it just above component, and if I am going to put those two things side by side, I do need a wrapper element. I'll create a wrapper div that surrounds component. Then, just above component, I will use header. Right here, header. Excellent. Now we're going to have the header showing up just on those private pages, and if we test things out, we can see on the login page, it's gone. If I go ahead and log in, it is going to bring me through the exact same login step we've already gone through many times before. And in the end, we should get over to the private page and everything should be fine. We should still see the header and we should still be able to navigate over to other routes like the Create Expense page. Right here, everything is still working as expected. Now you notice there I clicked the dashboard link by accident. The dashboard link still links to the incorrect location, the old dashboard page. But this actually brings up a good point, the other side of the problem. Right now, we're locking users out of those private routes, but there are also public routes we want to lock people out of. There's really no reason for a user to be able to view the login page if they're already logged in. So we want to go ahead and redirect them to the appropriate place, like the dashboard page. That is going to be the topic of the next video. We'll get to that in a moment. For now, let's go ahead and quickly recap what we did and make a commit. Right here, we set up private route, which is really just a wrapper around route. And the whole point of using it is to add some conditional logic in. It allows us to determine if the user is authenticated or not, and we can take the correct action, either rendering the private stuff or redirecting them over to a public page. I'm going to wrap this one up over inside of the terminal. We can go ahead and shut things down and use git status to view all the changes. We can use git add dot to add them to the next commit. I'll clear the output so it's easier to read. And then we're going to use git commit to make the commit. Git commit with the AM flag. Actually, A is completely redundant since we already added all of the files. We just need M. Right here, add private routes. I'm going to make the commit, and I'm going to avoid pushing or deploying. You are more than welcome to, but since we've already gone through the process, I'm not going to waste your time here going through that again. In the next one, we're going to focus on the opposite of this, the ability to create a public route. So let's go ahead and jump right over there.